Every single report that this administration has put out has later been revised in the opposite direction. Like, hey, we made 400,000 jobs. Oh, just kidding. It's really 50,000. Crime isn't bad. A month later, the FBI revises the statistic. Actually, it's a lot worse than it was. Inflation showing really high this month, so we're going to remove these 4 things that really inflated from the estimate, and here's the new total.
There's a reason why we have public education, and it's not to educate the public. People are starting to realize everybody's lying to us. If our news is this fake, what's our history like?
I was thinking about that the other day, right? Because the victors create the history and write the stories, right? How much of it is really real? I mean, it's always put up in this light of like good versus evil, right? And a lot of times where it's like, hey, we're the good guys and they're the bad guys, right? But there's so much more to the story. It's, there's so much gray in a lot of these situations. It really is scary to think about.
It's just going to get worse and worse and worse. We're just seeing the astronomical climb and debt issuance and all that.
It's wild how they lie about everything.
How do we navigate the digital ecosystem or the digital jungle and protect ourselves along the way, whether it's encrypted communication or whether it's not leaking data from your activity on your device, whether it's browsing and not having this big bulk collection basket with your name on it, just knowing everything about you.
It's not simple. It's not easy, right?
And there's no one-stop shop, and there shouldn't be a one-stop shop, and the one-stop shops are very suspect because they're just basically honeypots or potential honeypots. If they're a closed source, you can't trust them, and then they're the jack of all trades, which means they're not a specialist in anything. And so usually those are very suspect. So the only option is really to bolt on a la carte open source privacy solutions, and like kind of a soldier would bolt on his plate carrier and have his AR and tactical light and comms and all that kind of stuff, or a fireman would have all of his gear. You have to kind of know how these things work. You have to know what they are and what they do, and then you have to know how they work together, and then you have to have a mindset where you're like, okay, I'm willing to sacrifice this alluring convenience
It's the hardest part.
Privacy.
When people don't immediately see the consequences, it's very difficult for them to realize or understand. You almost have to go through this self-sovereignty of growth, of wanting to seek that out.
If you trust your institutions to protect your privacy, then what's the urgency? But this was kind of an offshoot of the Bitcoin rabbit hole for me, was what do we have on the other side of that? And I started looking into the Federal Reserve. I started reading books like The Creature from Jekyll Island, Anatomy of the State. Like, what is the state?
Yeah.
And then you start realizing that all of this technology is presented to us in a way that will enhance our lives. And all this free stuff and all this convenience, and really is designed to steal our attention and to surveil our lives. And so how do we then break out of that? And first you have to realize there's a problem. So say you realize it, well then where do you go? Well, if there's no reason to do it, like global technocracy and tyranny and lack of freedom and giving our kids basically a digital slave state, they're not going to have the urgency, and that convenience is going to be too alluring for them because they just don't have a lot of time by design, because this fiat treadmill is just going faster and faster and faster.
Welcome back to another episode of Cypherpunk'd. Today we're sitting down with John Burnett, a fascinating entrepreneur who embodies the intersection of old world business principles and new world sovereignty. John's story is unique. He's the owner of Tequiza, a successful traditional Mexican taqueria in Miami. But what makes this conversation particularly interesting is how John has evolved from a traditional business owner to becoming a vocal advocate for digital privacy and Bitcoin adoption. When John discovered Bitcoin, he described it as seeing in color for the first time, and since then he's dedicated himself to the Bitcoin circular economy and digital privacy. John's latest project, Digital Privacy Sessions, is an educational platform that brings digital privacy to beginners and the non-technical. In a world of increasing digital surveillance, John is empowering people to take back control of their digital lives and secure their freedom, one session at a time. We're here to talk with John about the journey from tacos to Bitcoin, from business to privacy, and how freedom tech can reshape our future. John, welcome to the show. It's great to have you.
Thank you, sir. Good to be here.
How about that intro?
That was great.
So you mentioned Bitcoin. I thought this was really cool. Was like seeing in color for the first time. Can you take us through that moment of revelation and how it changed your perspective on money, freedom, entrepreneurship?
Yeah. I think in hindsight, we walk through the world and it's kind of like seeing some people asleep, or NPCs, or whatever you want to call it. And I would say that I was never quite asleep, kind of always in a walking slumber of sorts, not really knowing. The world didn't make sense. Everything was just kind of cockeyed. And so I focused on just creating things, whether it's hospitality or other things. And I just kind of focused on doing my thing. I met my wife. She was the same way. We just kind of went our own direction, marched by our own beat. And things started getting really weird after COVID. And I had a good family member and friend that introduced me to Bitcoin in like 2017, right at the top of that bull market. And I didn't really get it. I bought a little bit, and right afterwards it tanked to $3,000. So I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to keep it, and I have stuff to do. And I got distracted. And later, he sold his house, moved to mid-Florida, and the first thing when we visited them was, hey, did you buy any more Bitcoin? I'm like, no, I've been busy with the business. And he said, oof. I'm like, man, what's going on? And why'd you sell your house and all this kind of stuff? And then we spoke for about 3 days. The first thing he said to me was, we started talking and discussing Bitcoin. And I said, well, what about all these other coins? And he's like, there's only one. Right? There's only Bitcoin. And from a sound money perspective, I was like, okay, well, what is that? And I started pulling on that thread. And then all of a sudden I was like, okay, this whole thing is a sham. The whole system is a big Ponzi scheme. And it was really like that crack in the matrix where you can then start ripping it open and then just following those breadcrumbs wherever they go.
Welcome down the rabbit hole.
Yeah. And they lead to many more.
Yeah.
And so then it was like seeing in color for the first time, where I'm like, okay, now everything I looked at from a different lens. And from this fixed point in space of Bitcoin, sound money, and it's, money is such a minimalist term for it. It's so much more substantial, whether you call it, human time or whatever it is. But it was pretty meaningful. And from that point on out, I just kept pulling the strings and following the breadcrumbs, and it's led all kinds of places. So
yeah, there's a lot of breadcrumbs. And
we can go wherever you want.
There's a lot of different rabbit holes to go down. Bitcoin is, there's a great quote that's something along the lines of, at first sight, Bitcoin seems like just this get rich quick Ponzi, like get rich quick scheme, right? And then once you start peeling back the layers, it's like, holy shit, this is so much more than just that. I mean, there's so much here from a game theory perspective, from a history of money perspective, from a, privacy perspective, from a, hard money perspective. There's all these different aspects, these little strings you can pull on, cryptographic perspective, all these different things, which is just fascinating, right? So how did you start your business, Tequiza, and how did you decide you wanted to incorporate Bitcoin into that?
Well, we started in 2014. Another kind of crazy story. I moved to Florida to open the Freehand and Broken Shaker. I'm not sure if you've heard about that location, but it was a kind of a boutique-y hotel, very successful food and beverage program, and it was owned by a hedge fund. I had really no joy working there, although I appreciate what I achieved there. And so right away, I'm like, okay, this isn't for me. And so I put together a couple guys to buy a building in South Beach, and there was this little restaurant space that was very misused. They tried to take a little outdoor section and make it a fine dining Cuban place, and it didn't work on any level. And I saw it as like a food truck in a building. And so I got the chef from the Freehand after he left, and we started Tequiza just out of the space. Then the main financial partner passed away. His wife went crazy. Lawsuits ensued. And then we ended up having to take that and move it elsewhere. And we wanted to preserve the concept. And it's just lived on its own merit ever since. And it's just a very authentic, approachable, affordable. We take blue organic heirloom corn, cook it, soak it, grind it on a stone wheel, make our own masa. So it's like everything from scratch. And it's still kicking. And then later, after the Bitcoin rabbit hole, then it was, well, how do we preserve our business, right? And so we started. I was trying to figure out a way to accept Bitcoin. It's not always so intuitive. A lot of people, which I agree with, they're like full self-sovereignty, run your own node and do your own stuff. And I do run my own node, but from an uptime perspective, it can be very problematic sometimes to have an operation that's constantly running, and then if something goes down, then it causes a lot of problems. So we ended up working with Ibex while they were still here in the U.S. And that's got set up really well. And then we put everything towards Unchained Capital. And so we just wanted to be a part of it, and we reserved Bitcoin on our balance sheet, and then also accepted for customers.
Nice.
And it just went on from there. And but I kind of got into food and beverage, not from the food and beverage part, because that's my partner, more from the if he's the clock face, then I'm kind of the gears behind the clock. And then there's other interests. And obviously, once you see Bitcoin and then you start seeing what the world is really like, then you got to find those passion projects to promote some other important things. So.
Absolutely. What's been the biggest challenge accepting Bitcoin at your taqueria? Is it like just dealing with being self-sovereign and having your own nodes? I mean, what point of sale software are you guys using? Are you using Byte Federal? Is one here in Florida that is really popular that we've talked to their team a couple times.
Yeah, we've with the POS systems, it's very specific. So you have certain needs, and it's hard to just use anything. So we've used Square, we've used Toast in the past. Mm-hmm. I was actually waiting for Square to just accept Bitcoin. It's really still a little bit puzzling to me why
that they haven't.
Yeah, because you can pay with Cash App, all integrated with a QR code on the screen, mm-hmm. but you can't pay in Bitcoin. And
what's going on with that, Jack? What's going on, Jack?
I'm not sure. It's been a while. Maybe it is. I think they started a program where you can automatically convert some of your revenue into Bitcoin, which is nice, but that's still kind of Bitcoin as a reserve asset. And I think very soon here, we're going to have to start gearing up with, a medium of exchange, because stuff's breaking.
Yeah. Are you accepting main chain Bitcoin, or are you just doing like Lightning, liquid Bitcoin? I mean, how are you approaching that? How are you thinking about that?
Yeah, it's Lightning. And for a while there, the fees were really high, so it made a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. And then it would be swept into a multi-sig account.
Okay, very interesting. As a small business owner embracing the Bitcoin circular economy, what unique challenges and unexpected benefits have you encountered, especially in brick and mortar settings? What advice do you have for other entrepreneurs considering Bitcoin?
I just saw it as a necessity. If I've made any mistakes, it's probably being too early in my judgment as to when things are going to happen or when things are going to break, and I think, that's timing is really difficult, but I wanted to make sure that we had an alternative to the dollar. I also wanted to make sure that, as they say, we're only at, 6% CPI or whatever it is, that it's really over 20.
Yeah.
And it's just going to get worse and worse and worse. We're just seeing the astronomical climb and debt issuance and all that. And so it's,
it's wild how they lie about everything. I mean, it's like everything is literally a lie. I mean, I think every single report that this administration has put out has later been revised in the opposite direction. Yeah. Like, hey, we made 400,000 jobs. Oh, just kidding. It's really 50,000. Or, hey, crime isn't bad. And then a month later, the FBI revises the statistics. And actually, it's a lot worse than it was. It's like every single time, it's like any bit of data that's put out is like a lie, right? I mean, it's like, hey, inflation's showing really high this month. So, we're going to remove these 4 things that really inflated from the estimate. And here's the new total. It's like, it's crazy. Like you mentioned CPI and you mentioned, here's what it really is. Have you ever heard of shadow stats?
No.
I think it's called shadow stats. Paul, are you able to pull that up? Shadow stats? And what it is it actually shows the inflation if we were still using the same, because the way they do it is they just keep changing how it's calculated, every once in a while. And, there may be some legitimate reason to do that sometimes, right? But it always ends up making the number look lower than what it really is, right? So if you actually compare the government statistics they used previously to what they're using now, here it is, John Williams. He does analysis behind and beyond government economic reporting. So he actually shows hey, this is how we calculated inflation, 10, 20 years ago. And it shows the astronomical, much higher number, right? Because they exclude certain things, especially basic necessities, the things that actually matter if there's inflation. They try to take those things out. Hey, we don't want to look at these things. We're just going to calculate it with the things over here that make our number look better. It's kind of wild, but for our listeners here who are interested in going down that rabbit hole, check out shadow stats.
I think people are starting to realize that we don't have a government, right? It is much further gone than that. I mean, the one reason why they're able to keep people in this belief is through labels, right? So you have a label called the United States government, or called the United States, or called a football team, or whatever you want to call it. And we're thinking about those labels, but all they are is labels, and then they're completely different people than they used to be. And these people can be absolute criminals. They can be absolutely corrupt. And why wouldn't they be corrupt if the money's corrupt?
The incentives really just make it that way, right?
Yeah.
A topic, if you go down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, that addresses and discusses this is the Cantillon effect, right? So those who are the closest to the money printers get the new money first, right? So there's all these special interests and entities that are connected. When that money printer turns on, they're right there to get that money. They're the first ones to get it, right? And the first ones who get to spend it in the economy. They have more purchasing power, and it usually tends to be those who are politically connected, those who are already extremely wealthy. And then, it sort of trickles down, and like at the very end, the poorest people get the highest interest rates after all the money's been spent. And that now you've got this rising income inequality. It's kind of crazy when you really when you really go down that rabbit hole and start examining these different things, and you start thinking about them. And many of these things aren't taught. They don't teach you this, right? Because the public education system, why would they want to teach you this, right? Because they're a product of that machine. So a lot of these things, Austrian economics is like not even discussed in textbooks, not even talked about. I didn't even hear about it until I learned about Bitcoin and Friedrich Hayek and Ludwig von Mises. Like I never, those people were not discussed in any of my history classes or textbooks or anything when I was growing up. It's just wild, right?
No, and I would even say that the machine is a product of them. If you look at society, which I believe is probably far more complex than this, but if you look at society as people that know, and then the herd or the rest or the rest of the people, you start going down into past resets, and it gets, a lot different.
Yeah.
And, there's a reason why we have public education, and it's not to educate the public. It is to make sure that we have everybody indoctrinated into the same way of thinking, not thinking about the things that are important. And it's the same thing with every institutional machine that we have. And so, people are starting to realize that, hey, everybody's lying to us. And then they start to realize that everybody always has lied to us. And you see this meme going around. They say, if our news is this fake, what's our history like?
I was thinking about that the other day, right? Because the victors create the history and write the stories, right? So it's like, how much of it is really real? I mean, it's always like put up in this light of like good versus evil, right? And a lot of times where it's like, hey, we're the good guys and they're the bad guys, right? But there's always so much more to the story. It's, there's so much gray in a lot of these situations, and it really is scary to think about. It absolutely is, right? So interesting topics here. Let's talk a little bit about your project, Digital Privacy Sessions. How did that come about? Walk us through that.
So I actually am changing the format. I'm putting it into an actual, to take the least, to make it the least friction possible. I'm turning it into an actual online course that people can do anytime. And in that, I kind of describe, like, it's hard to talk to people about digital privacy and get them to understand why it's so important. You have all this other noise about data privacy and, data protection laws and identity theft and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, that's all well and good, but digital privacy for me is, how do we navigate the digital ecosystem or the digital jungle and protect ourselves along the way, whether it's encrypted communication or whether it's not leaking data from, your activity on your device, whether it's browsing and not having this big bulk collection basket with your name on it, just, knowing everything about you.
It's tough, man. It is tough. It's not simple. It's not easy, right?
No, and there's no one-stop shop, and there shouldn't be a one-stop shop. And the one-stop shops are very suspect because, they're just basically honeypots or potential honeypots. If they're closed source, you can't trust them. And then, they're the jack of all trades, which means they're not a specialist in anything. And so usually those are very suspect. So the only option is really to bolt on a la carte open source privacy solutions, and like kind of a soldier would bolt on his plate carrier and have his AR and tactical light and comms and all that kind of stuff, or a fireman would have all of his gear. You have to kind of know how these things work. You have to know what they are and what they do, and then you have to know how they work together. And then you have to have a mindset where you're like, okay, I'm willing to sacrifice this alluring convenience
It's the hardest part.
Privacy, right?
For so many people, they don't understand the implications, right? Because like this has always been a topic of the cypherpunk community, is like, how do we get people to care about this?
Yeah.
Because in the digital world, you feel like you're alone. You feel like, hey, nobody's watching you, right? It's very different than going out in public where you see people watching you and hey, you want to close the door, to the bathroom, or hey,
Exactly.
you want, you're not going to get naked in public, or hey, you don't want somebody, listening in, sitting right next to you going like, this is the conversation you're having with your wife, right?
Yeah.
So there's all of these things that make it much harder for people to comprehend in the digital realm as opposed to the physical realm. And it's hard to, when people don't immediately see the consequences, it's very difficult for them to realize or understand, I think is the biggest hurdle. So you almost have to go through this self-sovereignty of growth, of wanting to seek that out, of understanding.
Yeah. And then if you trust your institutions to protect your privacy, then what's the urgency?
Yeah.
Right? But this was kind of an offshoot of the Bitcoin rabbit hole for me, was what do we have on the other side of that? And I started looking into the Federal Reserve. I started reading books like The Creature from Jekyll Island, Anatomy of the State, like all these, like what is the state?
Yeah.
And then you start realizing that surveillance and digital surveillance, all of this technology is presented to us in a way that will enhance our lives. And all this free stuff and all this convenience, and really it's designed to steal our attention and to surveil our lives. And so how do we then break out of that? And first you have to realize there's a problem. So then there's okay, so say you realize it, well then where do you go? Well, most people don't have the time to then, research all these different options and go through all this stuff and hours and hours and hours. And so my thing was, there's all these brilliant people in the space. And they can take a VPN, they can say, compare 3 different ones and talk about all this complex stuff. But that's really for beginners, like they just don't get it.
Yeah.
They won't get it. And then I was like, well, is there a place where beginners can go and not to become a race car driver, just get from 0 to 60, right? And then once you know how to drive, then you get the lay of the land, and then you can develop from there. And so that was the goal, is like, how do you get the masses understanding this thing for one, then being able to deal with the privacy solutions, bolt them on together and change their mindset. And you really can't do all that without talking about real world stuff, right? And if there's no reason to do it, like global technocracy and tyranny and lack of freedom and giving our kids basically a digital slave state, then they're not going to have the urgency, and that convenience is going to be too alluring for them because they just don't have a lot of time by design, because this fiat treadmill is just going faster and faster and faster. So to plug that hole, not to, there's plenty of people that have intricate knowledge about all kinds of solutions, which I learned from, but just to get people from 0 to 60, the beginner is the goal. So if I can succeed in that, then I'll be very happy.
So what's the onboarding process look like for your product? Like how much does it cost? How would I say I'm a brand new beginner? Walk me through the process.
Well, right now it doesn't cost anything. Right now, so the first step was to do the actual curriculum, the course and everything. So I have that all finished. And then there's a once a week level 1 and level 2. But what I'm finding is like people are just really busy, right? And so the problem is, if it's at 7 p.m. on a Tuesday Eastern time, then what about people in California that are still working?
3 p.m.,
it's just logistically challenging. So the phase 2 was to put it into a course, like an online digital course format. So technically that's all ready. I'm just actually recording and putting together the whole thing. And I have a certain bit of it done. I'll show it at the meetup later. But once that's finished, then it goes out and I'll do some selective testing and just say, hey, look, Give me feedback, give me feedback, give me feedback. And then we'll see what the fair market price would be for the course, and get people to promo it out and get people engaged, and we'll find that free market equilibrium. It's I'm a free market guy, so we'll see where it goes.
Sounds good.
But yeah, that's the next step. And right now I'm just concerned with what tweaks does it need to make sure that it's really beginner ready.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm happy to help with that. We deal. You're going to be at our meetup later, and the whole vision of our meetup is just to help people, to educate people that want to learn. And what I've found is that it's very hard to explain things to people that aren't ready. Like, it really is like the Matrix, right? Like, eventually something will happen in your life. You'll get debanked, or, you'll get censored. Something will happen to take away your human rights and your freedom. Yeah. And you'll see the light, or you'll hear a story, and it will resonate with you. Right. And then you're ready to kind of, hey, let me step outside the Matrix a little bit here, which is kind of a central feature of both, privacy, but also Bitcoin, right? Like financial freedom, right? It's kind of like this idea of an opt out of the system. What are your message to people? What would be your rallying cry? Like, why is this important? Like, how would you pitch somebody to tell them and explain to them, this is why this matters?
Digital privacy,
exactly.
Specifically.
Yeah. What's your Cypherpunk manifesto?
I mean, in
your version of
very few words, freedom will be measured in privacy. And we're entering into the digital age. We're kind of already in it, but just in the beginning of it. And our digital lives control more of our physical lives all the time. And the powers that be are very open about how they want to use digital means to control everything, whether it's social credit scores and CBDCs.
Yeah.
We'll see how far they get with that. I have a lot of hope for the future. But if we do nothing, there's not a lot of hope for the future.
Are you familiar with Dr. Robert Epstein and his work?
Probably not.
He runs the TechWatch Foundation, and basically what they've been doing is they've been monitoring a lot of these big tech companies, like Google is a prime one, right? So he's actually capturing in real time how they're actually manipulating the masses. It's wild. It's really, it's very dystopian what's going on. They're taking your lifetime of data and history and all the little Google products that you use, that you've essentially given away who you are, what your age is, all of your information. They're reading your emails. They know everything about you, and they're able to essentially, it's like a mass brainwashing. I mean, they are literally moving millions of voters in different areas. Sure. And the content that they're showing you is personalized to you. But if they want to move you on a certain political issue, they're going to show you more political propaganda for this. And he's like kind of capturing this in real time and creating court admissible data on this. And it's very dystopian. It's like extremely. It's evil, right? It's like they said Google took that out of their mission statement. Don't be evil, right? And then it's like what they're doing in some of the stuff is, and again, I don't even know if, the CEO or whoever even knows what some of these engineers are baking into these algorithms and how they're putting their thumbs on the scale, like these like digital overlords, and people don't even realize they're being brainwashed. It's like done so subtly. It's deeply disturbing.
No, it is. They control what you see.
Yeah.
And it's no different than Plato's cave. It's just a digital medium. And, like you look on Twitter, everybody's like, oh, Twitter's free speech. Twitter's not free speech. They don't cancel you.
Yeah. They
just turn you down.
Mm-hmm.
You'll just be silenced, and you'll be in this little digital room on your own, talking to nobody.
Yeah.
Maybe a few bots, and so this is wildly powerful. The
even still, you feel that way even after Elon took it over. You still think it's the same, or do you think it's better at least, or what are your thoughts there?
I mean, we can get into Elon. My whole thing is I gather information. I have a protocol by which to filter this information and see what sticks. It's like my own little personal mosaic of truth, right? I throw everything on the table and give it equal weight, and I'm not convinced that Elon Musk is a good actor.
Really?
I think there's a faction of folk, whether you call it the future technocrats or whatever, that we're changing a paradigm by which the human herd is controlled, right? It used to be through laws and quasi-elected or appointed, bureaucrats. But it seems that there's a push to start doing this in a much more high-tech way. And who's going to control that high-tech way? After the collapse of fiat systems, are we going to have something like, the Everything app that China has, and it's going to be part of X, and then we're going to have brain chips, and then we're going to drive electric cars that give you testicular cancer. And I mean, go into a Tesla with an EMF meter and tell me Elon is a great dude. So, but he could be. I mean, it could be a means to an end. I'm not sure, but no, Twitter is. So the way I see it is a lot of these people in charge, a lot of these people that are coming up and being these new leaders, they're just taking the baton from the previous person because the goal is not to lose our attention, right? And, you see this with a very questionable, in my mind, assassination attempt on Trump. I have a 5.56. I've shot it through a lot of stuff. I don't think he'd have an ear left if he actually got shot with one of those things. And then all of a sudden,
kind of that's like the whole thing. I was listening to somebody talk about the other day, and basically, it's like near impossible to miss from that range. But then what they said was, if he hadn't turned his head at that exact, like if he hadn't had that mannerism, he would have. They said it would have been right through his brain. He would have been done. They said he went like this at the same moment to point at the sign, and had he not done that movement, because they did the analyst, it was going right at his head. And had he not moved at that like last second, he would have been dead. Like it was just a coincidence that like he's talking and then he just, kind of looks over here. And just as that moment he looked, he moved, he changed it, and it just hit his ear. I mean, it's kind of like almost,
could have been.
It's crazy, right?
However, like I'm always skeptical. So, if the way the blood was and everything, it wasn't at the right angle, I don't think to really like you wouldn't be missing it would be like worse than Mike Tyson biting your ear. I think if a 5.56 round really flies through it. I
guess it just depends where it hits, right? Because if it hits here, his ear's gone. But it kind of just barely nicked the part of it, right? Like it just took a small part.
Could be.
I'm more skeptical of what happened afterwards, where they took away that guy who did the shooting, and like he has all these encrypted messenger accounts overseas, and then he's cremated within like 5 days, and like his whole apartment is completely scrubbed. I mean, I'm more skeptical of that. I mean,
it's
that
all
to me
suspect
as fuck.
Not only that, look, like there's Secret Service guys that are like, there's no way Trump would get that photo op on our watch, right? No way. He'd be on the ground protected. No choice in the matter. He would be hauled off into a vehicle because it's saving his life, right? At that moment in time, you don't know how many shooters there are, right?
Yeah, I think.
And that was the moment where Elon Musk and all these other high-profile people took the herd and rallied them around Trump.
Were you not? I mean, I was like, that rallied me around him, just emotionally, personally. When I saw that, I was like,
but that was
this guy's a fucking, that's, I saw something on X the other day. It was like, the primary, I think it was Naval Ravikant. I believe it was Naval. He posted something like, the primary trait of a leader, is courage, right? And so like, it's hard not to be moved by that moment of like, you literally just got shot, somebody behind you got shot in the head and died. Like, and you get up and you pump your fist. I mean, that's, you don't know what people are going to do in the moment when they're challenged, when something bad happens.
True.
I was very moved by that. I mean, I thought that was very authentic, and I thought, actually one of the guys, that was one of the Secret Service agents or people that were there. Later on, they said like they had the B team and it wasn't all of the right people, and they understaffed the event. And there's all these things, right, where they kind of like the head of the Secret Service, whoever it was, the girl said, we couldn't put people on the roof because it was sloped. Meanwhile, they've got these other roofs that they're on that's even more slopes. Like just total ridiculousness, right? But I think one of the people actually was somebody I went to high school with, one of the guys who was on him, and I've known him for years, always been a good guy, so it's like they just, and I think the one lady was maybe a little over, they had a girl Secret Service agent, DEI, and, maybe she was just not, maybe she was scared. I don't know exactly, but I just think you never know what people are going to do in a moment when there's, something like that happens. Right. So, I was moved by that. I mean, I thought, and towards Elon, do I think he's perfect? No, but I think it's nice to have somebody pushing back against all of the media conglomerates, have another option here. I think X still has a lot of work to do, and it's nowhere near where it needs to be to really enable and freedom and allow everybody to talk. There's still a lot of that engineering and stuff that probably needs to be. They probably need to go through the code there and find out how they're censoring people and doing some of the stuff from the old regime. But it's probably the best thing we got at this point, right? To at least have some semblance, right? Because Google and a lot of these other social media companies are just, completely censoring and doing what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, good, but I would just caution people not to lose themselves in their full faith in these leaders, right? Because
I think a lot of your stuff, you've been very vocal about that. That was actually my next question, which was going to say, let me just ask it so you can go right into it. You've been vocal about the dangers of relying on centralized figures for change. How do you see Bitcoin and digital privacy empowering individuals to reclaim responsibility over their lives and communities? And feel free to go into, not overly relying on these centralized figures, right? Because that's a very key component of Bitcoin, right? Where Satoshi was anonymous and he disappeared, right? He created the system and set it up.
Yeah, and even if he didn't, it's a protocol.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
And so what I see a lot of is that people are afraid. They don't understand what's going on. They're typically too zoomed in. They think politics is really politics. They think that nation states are really nation states, that it's really one nation state against another. And they're not zoomed out enough. And so they end up putting all this emotional energy behind somebody, and you can't shake them from it. And this is very dangerous, right? If somebody wants to support somebody and say, yes, I'll support you because I think you can do what you say you're going to do. But the minute you don't, I'm going to be on you and keep you accountable. And that's a totally different thing, right?
Yeah.
I'm totally fine if Trump gets in there and Elon gets in there and everybody gets in there and they do the right thing. However, I don't think that they are independent people. I think that they are, they have various interests behind them, and we'll see. But I think people need to take everything with a grain of salt. Now,
less so though than what's there now, I would say.
Yes, but
it's important to contrast that.
This is what the
people that are there now are literally completely controlled by those interests. Where you've got someone like Trump, who's already a billionaire, he's definitely not perfect, and he's definitely, has opinions of different things. But and Elon, who's the richest man in the world, essentially, right? It's like, those guys already have fuck you money. They're done. You know what I mean? Like, they're set for life. I feel like putting themselves in this position now, there's got to be more to it than just the money, right? I think that is a more believable base case than essentially people who have literally been installed by the powers to be the regime that are essentially just puppets. Nobody voted for Kamala Harris. She literally, she was like crazy. I mean, she didn't even go through the primary, and like everybody knew, right? Anybody with a brain knew that Biden was like demented and had cognitive issues. I mean, like that was, and then the media just comes out and pretends like it's this big surprise. It's like, we've been saying this for 4 to 5 years that the guy's been, not up to par, right?
Yeah.
So she was just like installed. It was like, hey, now you're the candidate. Like you're the, like, no voting process, no nothing, right? It was just very wild. People say what they want about it, but like at the end of the day, that was not democratic. That was the powers to be pulling the strings and just decided those things, right?
100%.
Behind the scenes.
100%. So if I was the evil overlord trying to control the masses, then I would give them that and make them completely upset about it and scared about what would happen if that continues, complete totalitarian psychopath in office, right? That's totally incapable of doing anything. And then I would have my secret weapon, which is somebody that they could all rally behind. And that's my fear with these guys.
So you're thinking these guys are like playing 3D chess. That's kind of like where your mind's at right now.
Yeah, I think so. And I could be wrong, and I'm happy to be wrong, but I'm not going to.
I hope you're wrong. I mean, I'll take the opposite side of that, because I want to believe in something positive, right? I want to believe that.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Like, if you keep going, then there is something very positive. And so, regardless of who is they and what's out there and all that kind of stuff, for me, the solution is still the same. Exit the system as much as possible. So that means sound money. It means being in the digital jungle. I need to be digitally private. I need to know how to defend myself. I need to know how to get my own food and water and keep it clean, homeschool my children, reject the medical industrial complex. And then energy, becoming energy independent is the trickiest part, but even that's coming out more and more now with free energy, which was long since passed, because part of what money printers can buy is fake history. And so all of this stuff is coming out like now. And so if we believe that the political system has evolved according to the mainstream historical narrative, which is very organically and just kind of this conflict, that conflict, and revolutions and all that kind of stuff, then yeah, you could say that, you know, these guys are potentially going to do some really good stuff. However, if you zoom out more, it seems more complex than that. It seems that there's a higher power structure, in which case it would be unlikely that they could be independent of it. Now, on the other side, they could be working it from the inside. That's kind of the whole white hat, kind of theory. And there's some merit to it. And I hope that that's true.
I'm all about both. I think, you know.
But I think still for me, the answer is still leaving the system, because regardless, the system is not going to survive.
Yeah.
And you can't fix the broken system from within the system. So I'm like, I hope that these guys are legit.
Yeah, there's a famous Cypherpunk quote that's like, cypherpunks write code, not laws, right? So this whole idea of affecting change from outside the system. And in my thought process is like, that's amazing. Like, absolutely, let's absolutely do that, right? But at the same time, let's work both angles, right? Let's work both sides of the coin. Because, you know, I've met some great senators like Senator Marsha Blackburn from Tennessee and Senator Cynthia Lummis from Wyoming, right? And like I've talked to them, and like they are all like, they believe in Bitcoin, they believe in the vision, they believe in those things, right? And having a conversation with them, you'll see that, right? Watching RFK Jr. go up there at the Bitcoin conference and talk about this, like you could tell he's passionate, you could tell he cares. You know, Trump, not quite there yet. I mean, you could see he sees the business aspect of the businesses and the promise, and you know, he's not quite to the point in his journey, I think, where a lot of people are a little skeptical. But I think when he starts realizing, this is a new, you know, I think he said at the Bitcoin, what he said, you guys are like the Wright brothers, or you guys are like, you know, the inventors, right? You know, you're at the cutting edge. So I think he kind of like gets that. He might not fully grasp everything, but I think. And I think RFK Jr. actually said this at his speech. He said, you know, I've been here for a couple of years, and that, like, watching his speech from the year before to this year was like, oh my God, this guy has grown so much, and he really gets it, right? So you kind of see the evolution, and I've seen the same evolution with elderly people in my own family, people that I've talked to 4 years ago who are like, Bitcoin's a scam, right? And then now they're like asking me questions and going down the rabbit hole. And I think it's just part of the natural evolution. Once you're exposed to Bitcoin, at some point you're going to get a little bit more curious. And when you start to peel back the layers of that onion, you're just like, oh my goodness, right? There's so much more here.
Well, for me, it's going to be very interesting to see, okay, well, you know, how are these people going to deal with the debt, with the dying fiat currencies? With the influence from central banks, with the influence from Israel. You know, because right now it's like, you know, the U.S. is Israel's lapdog, and we're pumping weapons out into every place. And it's really getting insane. You know, so everybody is so pro-Zionist, right? And it's such a hypocrisy that, you know,
that's a whole rabbit hole in and of itself.
Oh, of course.
I mean, just to go down, it's such a clusterfuck over there. It's hard to even. You know,
and so like all of this central banking and Zionism is connected, right? And so how is, you know, I get it that people want everybody to be their savior, and I want them to as well. But in order to do that, they're going to have to shake the entire central banking apparatus. And there's been no talk as to how that gets done, right? So like, I
don't know enough about all that. I mean, those are some rabbit holes. I wish I knew more. I just, I'm uneducated on that particular rabbit hole. What I can say is that I do think Bitcoin, you know, gradually then suddenly, I think it just plays out over time, and you're going to continue to see the debasement of fiat currencies. And, you know, Bitcoin's going to continue to gather value. And I think at some point, Bitcoin becomes this underlying, you know, treasury reserve asset for the world, right? It's this global settlement layer that everything else is built on top of. And whether that transition happens very quickly and drastically or slowly, I lean to think that it will happen more slowly. I think that's honestly better for people if it does happen more slowly, because everybody will have time to learn about it, get a little bit of exposure, and then it won't just be like this giant event that just crushes people who have no clue, right? So I think that'll probably be better for the world as that plays out. But yeah, I mean, it's some crazy conversations, some interesting stuff to think about.
Yeah, I don't think we have a lot of time. Have you listened to Cliff High at all?
No, I have not.
So he's a very interesting guy. Some would call him out there, but he has a software that pulls language from all kinds of places, big data sets, and aggregates it, and it's this whole process. And he came to this idea because he was on an airplane, and the airplane got struck by lightning, and then all of a sudden, the people on the plane, they're like, "We're going to get struck by lightning again." There was a few comments, and they got struck by lightning again, and this put the thought into his head that we are all quasi-psychic, although suppressed, but this psychic connectedness leaks out in our language, especially online. And so then he can aggregate this leaked out language and then determine a lot of events, and he's wickedly accurate. And then you get into like remote viewers and stuff like that. And so I think what we're going to get into here pretty soon is the suddenly part. And
I guess we'll see.
Yeah,
I guess we'll see. That does sound like a little out there, right? But anecdotally, obviously, some anecdotal evidence. But you're saying he's got this big data thing. I wonder, there's so much. Again, because like at first thought, you just dismiss something like that. It just sounds crazy to me, right? That's my first thought. But then you think about things like quantum physics and quantum entanglement. And I think I watched this Through the Wormhole with Morgan Freeman. And I don't remember the exact science or specifics of what it was, but there was this device that was monitoring something, and it was a couple minutes before the terrorist attacks that occurred on September 11th. There was like these big spikes of something, right? Like, so very interesting to, really, if you really push yourself out to the edges, the frontier of science and physics and a lot of those things. I mean, there's some interesting stuff happening at those levels when it comes to consciousness and quantum phenomena,
sure.
Right? So I'm not going to just immediately dismiss that as crazy talk, because it seems like there might be something there, right? We just don't know quite how it all works. Or what it is yet.
I think people do. I think we've been taught the wrong science.
So you're saying we do know, but nobody's said anything about it? Like it's a hushed secret?
There's whether you call them breakaway societies or the shepherds of the herd or whatever you want to call them, there's people that know about, like Einstein is coming out as a fraud, right? Tesla was far more accurate, except he wasn't discovering this stuff. He was rediscovering it, right? The electromagnetism, everything is frequency, vibration, and energy, et cetera, et cetera. This is a totally different kind of basis by which to do physics and certain sciences, right?
So you're comparing Einstein's general theory of relativity to, the quantum.
Not quantum. I mean,
quantum
I'm not an
physics.
expert in a lot of this stuff, but from a standpoint of electromagnetism, energy, frequency, vibration, Tesla was in a different vein. It's like if they went down two different paths.
That's that's in physics. You've got theoretical physicists. So somebody could be working. It's hard to call anybody in physics a fraud because so much of it is theoretical, right? Because people might study something. You might spend 10 years of your life going down a rabbit hole that turns out to not work out, right? It's like, hey, I had this string theory idea and it's all theoretical. And I'm doing all this math and I spent 15 years on this with like a group of 10 people. And then at the end of the day, we get down to the bottom of the rabbit hole and you're like, shit, this doesn't work out, right?
Sure.
So you can't really, people are exploring ideas and, looking at down different, events, whether it's quantum physics or the general theory of relativity. The more light we can shine, right? Like learn different things. Even if you study something that doesn't work out, that's still valuable because you've discovered, hey, there's nothing at the end of this tunnel. So the world benefits from that information. So things get very tricky when you get to the frontiers of especially physics. A lot of the theoretical stuff is, very wild and interesting, very interesting.
Yeah, sure. I think it comes from does consciousness come from the physical or does the physical come from consciousness? And what is, where are we and who are we and what type of beings are we and what is our history and all this kind of stuff? I mean, it gets pretty deep. And I think, when you start getting into this kind of perceived reality of the masses, we have our own stumbling blocks where we if there's something that challenges our perceived reality enough, it's like it's ontological shock, right? So people reject it and fight against it.
You definitely see that a lot, right?
And then you see the whole, what do I know and what's new information? So if you have new information which conflicts with what you know, then most people will say, okay, in order for me to not believe what I already know, you have to disprove it 100%. But in order for me to believe what the new stuff you're telling me, you have to prove it 100%. And so, you know, like when we start getting into making sense of all these different things, then we have to start getting into like false history and all these other things which tie into things that we're not really supposed to know, which kind of lean more towards the past, was more like Tesla, right? And you start hearing about, you know, free energy generation. You know, Ashton Forbes has got onto that because of the, I don't know, have you followed Ashton Forbes at all on Twitter?
No, I've not.
He's an interesting one. The that Indonesian flight that disappeared.
I did hear something about that. You know, like there's some interesting. There's so many rabbit holes you can go down.
That'll blow your hair back.
Yeah, it was almost like they were watching it and it just something happened and it was like gone. Right. I feel like I watched. I don't know enough. I didn't like spend. Like I could have spent. I found it at like midnight one night and I spent like an hour on like kind of looking into it, but it was like. I could spend 3 days trying to get to the bottom of this, but it's like, you know, at the end of the day, the plane's gone, right? It's like, we don't know what happened to it. So I don't think we have any answers there yet, but there's just all sorts of interesting phenomena that have occurred and that happened, right? So,
well, to tie it back to Trump with Tesla, the rumor has it that Tesla's journals and information actually went to Trump's uncle that was at MIT.
Interesting. Fred Trump, I believe.
That was his father. I forget. John Trump.
Maybe it was John Trump. Yeah, because Trump does talk about him. Says he was a very smart guy.
Yeah. So you know, we'll see how it all plays out. I think you know, things are increasing in the rate of change.
Yeah,
I think we can all feel that. And I think it's. I think we will enter another paradigm, which is going to rock a lot of people's worlds. But if people can start to flex their perception of reality, it's going to be a lot easier. Because what happens is you get into these rabbit holes, you get to the scary part, and then people stop, right? But if you keep pushing through, then it's incredible. Like what we're capable of, the future we're capable of. But it's not what people think, you know?
I'm really excited about the future. I think Elon has talked a lot about this, despite what you may think, but he's always saying the future is going to be fucking amazing, right? Like he's pursuing all these different projects and all these different things. And I truly believe it's genuine. Like he's genuinely interested in figuring this all out and pushing humanity forward, right? Trying to get to Mars, trying to explore, trying to figure these things out. Yeah. So, I'm optimistic there. And I think that, you know, today is election day, right? So we're recording this podcast on election day. And
what a day.
You know, what a day. And, you know, you mentioned moving past the left and right binary sort of in politics, right? Sadly, the United States only has this system where it's like, those are really the only two choices. You pick one or you pick the other. And, you know, one of those people is going to win. Anything else is just for whatever reason has never broken through, it's like a two-party system, right? What I will say is that I think for me personally, this election, the choice is very clear, right? You've got one party that's literally like the blob, the machine, and, you know, the status quo. And then you've got this other, you know, party, which is now incorporated. It's changed in real time. And you've got people like Elon Musk, people like RFK Jr., right? Pushing different ideas. Howard Lutnick, who's the leader of the transition team. I mean, I watched a podcast from him the other day with Anthony Pompliano, and it was like probably one of the best podcasts I've ever seen. I mean, listening to this guy talk about his experience and, you know, he had his business like in the Trade Center towers when they got hit, like 700 of his employees died. Like he would have been there that day had he not been taking his kid. He lost his brother, family. He was taking his kid to school. Like they had literally everything was amazing. They had blown it out of the water. They were doing so well, and he lost like 700 people from his team. Like it was very emotional how he rebuilt, what he did, how he took care of those families. I mean, willing to think outside the box, really like that. Thought it was, you know, such a powerful message. You've got Tulsi Gabbard, right? Independent voice. You've got, you got Elon, and you just have this Vivek Ramaswamy,
It's like the Avengers.
You've got all these different people, and they have different views. They might not agree on everything, right? And a couple former Democrats and people crossing the aisle, independents. I just think that now they're talking about Ron Paul working with Elon to cut the Department of Government Efficiency, right? To really cut out the budget, quit the reckless spending. So I think that is a much more optimistic vision for the future. It's a superstar team, of different people that I believe personally aren't captured by business interests, that they are free thinkers, that they're willing to buck the system and buck the trend. And I believe that, they're genuinely good people personally. That's my personal opinion. So what are your thoughts? Because it's election day. I mean, share your opinion. What do you think? Did you vote? Are you going to vote? Where are you at with the whole process?
From a Bitcoin standpoint, I could say that I'm more in the Jeff Booth camp, where I put my energy towards self-sovereignty. Mm-hmm. My biggest concern is when there is systemic collapse, which is mathematically guaranteed, then I want to make sure that my family and my community mm-hmm. is safe. And I don't believe that long term we'll need any centralization, right? I do very strongly believe that now we have the technology mm-hmm. to control and secure this medium of human time we call money, mm-hmm. And that we have very soon we will have energy resources. Energy scarcity is a myth. That's a whole nother rabbit hole.
Let's talk about that. I mean, that's a whole nother, yeah, it is a myth. I mean, obviously the sun releases so much energy that in 1 second you get more energy than we spend in the whole year, than whole civilization uses in 5 years or something crazy, right? Just 1 second of that sun hitting the earth, all that energy and radiation, everything that's released is enough to, essentially power civilization for years, right? Yeah. Kind of wild.
That's one source, but we have
nuclear and all these sources.
Yeah, but we also have the ether, right? Which was removed from the periodic table of elements, right? This was the fifth element, earlier, early 1900s, I believe, was removed from the periodic table, where you have vast amounts of electricity in the actual atmosphere, which can be harnessed and which has been harnessed in the past, which gets into false history. For example, a cathedral gets its name not from a place of worship, but from the word cathode, right? They were energy generating machines almost. So this is a whole rabbit hole, which gets into Tartaria and lost history. And
I've never done that. That's a rabbit hole I've never gone down. So you're going to have to send me some information about it.
I'll send it to you.
I'm very skeptical, but I'll go down it and do my research.
It's beautiful. And then you have these giant, these round windows, these on big, giant Gothic cathedrals that
the stained glass windows, is that what we're talking about?
Kind of, yeah. They're concrete structure, round. Uh-huh. They have these patterns. Those are cymatic patterns, right?
What is a cymatic pattern?
So have you seen where they'll put salt or sand on a metal plate and then they'll put a certain frequency through it and then it creates a shape?
I did see that recently. That's super interesting. I mean, how sound is creating different shapes in the sand. I mean, that is fascinating. I mean, it just, to me, that just tells me there's so much math involved in the universe and it's just fascinating.
And this ties into frequency, vibration, mm-hmm. energy. Mm-hmm. And so we have limitless energy in the atmosphere that, I mean, if you think about it, if you want to control a population, you can't have abundant energy. You need to control the energy. You need to meter it. You need to have them pay for it. You need to invoke scarcity. Same thing with oil. It renews itself. It's not a fossil fuel. The fossil fuel term was only introduced by the Rockefellers in the early 1900s to induce a sense of scarcity. Then you control the supply because you control the industry, because you control the central banking. Then you have that. I mean, if you really want to just do a quick reality check, you can look at the jet fuel hoax. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
Okay, so you don't have to take my word for it. You don't have to do anything. All you have to do is look at the specs that Boeing gives you for a 747. And you say, how much fuel is the capacity for this jet, mm-hmm. right? And then it'll say something like 60,000 something gallons or whatever. And then you look at what a 10,000 gallon fuel tanker looks like, and then you're like, there's no way. You look at the Concorde, same thing. They're not keeping it in the wings. Where are they keeping it? Right. And so what's actually happening is it seems to be that there's some fuel, probably to get up to altitude, but this atmospheric energy can be harnessed by the jet engines kind of through a perpetual motion where it takes in enough energy to keep it going and thrust and to keep the whole process going. There's no way that you can fly with that much fuel, nor is there any place to keep it. And then they say that the fuel ticket or the ticket for the airline is half just to pay for fuel, right? And then you get into false history where they used to have Zeppelins and all kinds of amazing different independent, self-sovereign ways to travel through the air. You have to control the energy, you have to control the money, you have to control the transportation. And then you control the food, then you control the information, you control everything downstream.
We're going down some rabbit holes here. This sounds real crazy. I'm very skeptical of all these things that you're saying right now.
Be skeptical.
But
Don't trust me.
I'm willing to.
Don't trust me. Just
look at the information that you send me. I mean,
have an open mind and open heart.
I've got an open mind. I mean, but this sounds a little crazy. But
heck yeah, sounds crazy.
It's a little out there.
But what's actually crazy is the fake facade of a reality that we've been handed generationally, right?
Mm.
And it's generational warfare. So if you get the first generation, they believe it, and then their kids will believe it, and then by the grandkids, the grandparents were the wise ones. They've just been given false information.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely see that with a lot of things. On a positive note, I will say that over the past 100 years, right, human progress has achieved many amazing things. And despite the negative things, we have seen lower poverty rates globally, right? Less people dying. The life expectancy of everybody has gone up over time, over the past 100 years, right? So we are seeing positive things. I mean, not everything is awful, but there's still room for massive improvement in so many things that people do, right? Let's talk a little bit more about, freedom technology. Let's go back into Bitcoin a little bit. What other tools what other tools do you think are powerful for people that want to protect their privacy, preserve those things?
I mean, Bitcoin for me was not very good at privacy.
True. Yeah, I do agree with that. It's better than the status quo, but it does require some knowledge to be private.
Yeah, I mean, it could be private if there wasn't, KYC, which will shake KYC eventually here pretty soon. But
that's a whole nother rabbit hole. I have very strong opinions on that.
Yeah.
Very strong opinions, and I think it's probably one of the worst possible things that the government enforces and does right now. The whole KYC AML regime actually just creates these massive honeypots that are constantly exploited by hackers, and actually makes everybody less safe and makes the world a worse place, right? Because, KYC AML, there's no data to suggest or support that all this KYC AML massive regime of documents and honeypots of people's data by all these different companies that literally don't specialize in protecting it, could care less about it, and constantly get hacked, that actually makes the world a worse place, and that they don't even catch the criminals, right? So 99% of the crime still happens. Like KYC AML maybe stops 1% of it, while creating such a massive burden on all the honest, good, hardworking people. Grandma who now has her social security number stolen, gets scammed, gets stolen from, ruins her life. I mean, these are constant things that happen, right? All the social security numbers, people's data sold on the dark web constantly, credit card numbers, everything, right? It actually just makes the world, it's such a limiting force for human progress. And there's really no data to suggest they're just doing it because they have the power to do it and because they've done it, and it's just bad policy that's been stuck around, right? And in my opinion, it's a violation. The government requiring that and trying to enforce that is a violation of the Fourth Amendment. That's my personal opinion.
100%. And, but it's not, I think we need to get past the point where we're like, oh, the government is trying to do good. They just may be bad at it. They just may be incompetent or whatever. No, the criminals are running things, right?
So you're just saying the inmates are running the asylum. That's
exactly
just what it is.
Exactly. It is, and it's been that way for decades, right? So we have some. We need to start looking at things adversarially, not giving the benefit of the doubt.
I agree with that. You don't get the benefit of the doubt. You're a public institution. I'm probably leaning more towards what you said, whereas like, it should be approached from an adversarial point of view. That being said, not everybody that is in the government is a bad person or does bad things. No. But yes, they do not get the benefit of the doubt. We're seeing that with voting today, all these problems and errors and, people getting turned away from polls because the computer's broken or all this stuff. You don't get the benefit of the doubt. You're a public institution. You're supposed to be on top of this shit. You don't get the benefit of the doubt, right?
Yeah, and they're not. And if we look at it logically, if you have the magical wand of a money printer, that's the source of it. I mean, it's more complex than that, but then you can corrupt anybody.
Yeah.
And so why would we think that it hasn't been corrupted already?
It's just human nature. I mean,
and not
human nature. I mean, we're imperfect beings. Yeah. I mean, you give somebody so much power and so much control, and just the incentives, right? Show me the incentives, and I'll show you the outcome.
Yeah,
and that's one of my favorite quotes, and it's so true for humans.
Exactly.
It doesn't even necessarily need to be like one or two people deciding it. It's just you got hundreds of people that are all controlled by their incentives, and you get the system that, of course, is going to benefit their they're going to incentivize themselves, right? Like it just. Even if they subconsciously don't even realize it,
sure. And then you would spend a lot of resources to try to get the population not to realize what's going on.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, that's because it goes against your own incentives, right?
Exactly.
Like, you just subconsciously, you're going to believe the thing that's benefiting you, right? Even if you don't actively consciously think about it, it's just, hey, this is working for me. Like, this is the good thing, right? Like you're just going to believe it. Yeah. Like it's just the incentive, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so for me, it's how do I remove myself from the system as much as possible? So like onto digital solutions, I see it as it is a necessity now to learn how to handle yourself privately in the digital space, right? And self-sovereignty, et cetera. And so, just as, previous generations knew how to grow a garden, then people now are going to have to know, okay, where am I compromised digitally online? And they're going to start seeing a flailing, dying system doubling down and tripling down in the most overt attacks on privacy and ramping up surveillance that they're going to start to feel the heat.
Yeah.
Right. They just haven't felt it yet.
I think you're right. Some of us have. And, that's why we're like, this is totally ridiculous and insane.
Yeah.
And it's out of control. And I think you're right. I think it's like that matrix, right? When you have to be ready for to feel that crack in the matrix, and then being willing to step outside to really think about these issues, because technology is moving so fast. And now with the advent of AI, like this Orwellian surveillance is going to get even worse. I mean, people don't realize that, and again, Edward Snowden, for example, I think he shares your same political view when you said like, hey, these people aren't gods. Don't, you can support them if they follow through with what they're saying they're going to do, and you align with their beliefs, but at the same time, don't worship them, right? Like you said, I think, and Edward Snowden had a great speech at the Bitcoin conference about that very issue,
and he said that in a very subtle way, because it's a dance. It's like a fine line to say, caution, folks, be skeptical, eyes wide open. The battle is not won.
Yeah.
Without turning them off by somehow slandering their heroes, right? And so the way he said it was subtle, and I hope it was effective. I got the message.
You got the message too. I mean, I agree, with what he said, and that ethos, right? That being said, I think there's a clear choice for me in this election. As someone who's now at least the lesser of two evils. Yeah. And again, I'm all about affecting change from the outside of the system, but also let's try to have a better system at the same time, right? Let's pick let's go with the better option. And I clearly think, at least for crypto, Web3, human freedom, the option is clear in this election, at least for me.
Sure. And I think it's, I think the dangerous point comes when people are like, I saw a post earlier today. I don't remember who it was from, but it was like, go out there and vote. And we've won our country back, right? Well, I think that this is just the start of the next marathon, right?
Yes, that's true.
And if,
we've got a chance to win our country back. That's how I feel.
Maybe. But again, I don't need a football team. I just need the players. I need my community, right?
Yeah.
And so
You talked a lot about that, about community. How do you foresee, and what are your thoughts on growing a more privacy focused community? Peer support. What do you think?
Well, I think more and more people are latching on. I'm just doing it one person at a time personally, and then with with digital privacy sessions, then hopefully we can cast a much bigger net and get people in. But I've had a lot of luck with just my closest tribe. We're on like Simple X, and we're all encrypted, and we're doing our thing, and then. And then I'm like, stressing about, okay, what is Lightning going to do? That's still very clunky. And how does Bitcoin become private? And then you hear about Fedi and you start dipping into that. And that's incredible. If you
the eCash stuff, the Fedi Mint.
Yeah. And just it's basically like a digital private community of sound money that can, because you sacrifice on the base layer for decentralization and security.
Yep. I mean, there's always trade-offs.
Yeah. And so then you can kind of make it up on the second layer, but then Lightning is also, like, I'm not a Lightning expert, but there's some limitations. Yeah. And then you start, okay, well then Fedi kind of takes the ball and runs it further.
Okay.
And then
I'm kind of waiting on like all these different experiments to play out, Liquid and Fedimint and Lightning. I would say the one I have the most experience with is Lightning, and it's definitely a clunky. You've got to have relays connected. There's a lot that goes into it, right? So I'm kind of like thinking none of this stuff is really ready for prime time yet. But I think we're going to come to something that makes the right trade-off where you still get the great user experience, and still most of the privacy and decentralization. Yeah. And I think personally, for me, like I don't mind paying $1 to do a transaction on the main chain, but at some point in the future, there's going to be so much demand for that block space that it's going to become unfeasible.
Sure. And
I don't know if that's 5 years, 10 years, 2 years. I don't know when that time is, right? But as of right now, it hasn't hit that point yet. So I haven't really been forced to really go down these different rabbit holes. But I am kind of like keeping an eye on them and exploring them and being open-minded to these different rabbit holes.
Yeah. I mean, I think, there's all of this stuff is going to be a constant evolution of technology, but it's there. Like it's whether one solution or the other solution wins out. I mean, it doesn't really matter if Netscape or some other browser wins in the end. Like the browsing has been figured out, right? And so, from a privacy perspective on money, I think that it's just about baked. And I think we have such good solutions generally with privacy. I mean, if you see like Mulvad VPN, they just released this DITA. I don't want to butcher it, but it's they're countering AI surveillance on packets.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah, it's where they'll put in fake data in between and then make all the packets the same size, so you can't tell from a packet pattern exactly what people are looking at. So
interesting.
It's like this cat and mouse game.
It's like evolution of species, like of organisms, right? But it's also like the predator and the prey. It's this constant. Hey, there's advancement here, there's an advancement here, there's an advancement here. And it's important that, we fight back against the totalitarianism and the Orwellianism and the surveillance, right? Because, their systems are getting more sophisticated, right?
They're getting more sophisticated, but they're incredibly expensive to maintain.
Yeah.
Incredibly, right? And you have to have enough of the population willing to do your bidding while your paper money is starting to fail.
Yeah.
So, like, there's a real opportunity to say, okay, if enough people can start to appreciate privacy solutions, then you start to take the power out of the surveillance network. And these networks can't be sustained forever. And then they'll collapse under their own weight.
I think that's a great analysis, which is part of the reason that I think, again, it's important to fight on both sides, right? Within the system and outside the system. And this battle within the system should say, hey, our Constitution with this nation, at least in the United States, what our nation is founded on doesn't allow these things to begin with. So why the fuck are we doing them? Why are we violating the First Amendment, Second Amendment, Fourth Amendment, et cetera, right? Like, why are we allowing this to happen?
But if you look at, the Fed is unconstitutional. Right. I mean, there should never be a central bank. In fact, there was
so much history about that, about, Andrew Jackson and them fighting back against it. And then I mean, there's a long history if you go down the rabbit hole of money and study the history of the U.S. and, look at what happened in 1913 and the different arguments between Friedrich Hayek and, this where you got John Maynard Keynes and this argument to not do that. And, Friedrich Hayek really predicted what would happen. He said, the whole logic was like, hey, we want to prevent these boom and bust cycles in the economy. We want to smooth it out. We don't want to have, this. And Friedrich Hayek really said like, hey, you're going to create the mother of all boom and bust cycles by doing this. It's actually going to make it worse by pushing off of the reckoning of bad business decisions. And sure enough, he was completely right, because that Great Depression that occurred was probably one of the worst economic boom and bust cycles that ever happened, the Roaring '20s and the Great Depression. So he called it. He really did.
Yeah, and I think now with Bitcoin, I think we are entering such a big paradigm shift that it's hard for people to realize how big it is. Like, decentralization doesn't work with centralization. So I don't see it in any way possible that we're going to have nation states backed by Bitcoin, right? The nation states are going to collapse far sooner than that will ever take place.
You think so? Interesting.
Yeah. Look.
I think their power is just going to be curtailed, and we're going to have a more, I'm kind of like, again, it's hard to say with history. Anything could happen, right? You just don't know what's going to happen. So everyone has their opinions on it. I think the smart nations that have a better chance of surviving will ultimately have a lot more Bitcoin on their balance sheets. They will be run more efficiently, and they will be run at the will of the people, not with uncapped, spending power. Just print money to fund whatever program, steal money from all the poor people by inflating their currency. I mean, that will absolutely end, I think. And I think that's just math. I think that has to end, right?
But when that ends, there's no government.
Well,
right? I think it'll be more
local, right? More localized, more smaller government. I think, for some problems that, like, where you've got these, you've got these issues like small fire departments, small this. I think you're going to have much smaller government. I think you'll still have, but it'll be much more accountable and localized to the local level. I think it'll be much more decentralized, I guess, is the way I want to explain it.
Yeah, and that's kind of this balkanization process where, for example, how do you fund the federal government if you can't print money?
Yeah, you have to.
There's no way.
You have to take it via tax, and that's like, people don't like that, right?
Like 120%.
It really cuts
tax?
it. Yeah, not at this level. I mean, something's got to give. You're not wrong. I mean, it's the math doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense because there's been no requirement for them to be fiscally responsible. They don't have to be, because they can do what you just said, print the money, do the different things that they do, and they can get away with it, and they've gotten away with it, right? So yeah, no doubt about that.
So I think the what we're going to see is those that stand to lose from not having money printers are trying to cause enough crises or chaos or fear that then we can be cattle herd into a more controllable situation, right? Whether it's CBDCs and surveillance and dystopian, whatever, we just got to not let that happen. Right?
Have you met? See, like, we're part of the Florida Business and Blockchain Association. Are you familiar with that? The FBBA?
Just by name.
Yeah. Okay. We've done some great stuff there. Through there, our organization has basically passed a law here in the U.S. in Florida, the anti-CBDC bill. We pushed that really hard, to try to protect our privacy and our rights. And a lot of other states copy that as well. And it's interesting. I mean, pushback within the system itself to try to fight that. So you have different part of one of the great parts about the United States is you've got these different states, right? Yeah. So you've kind of got this, people can do different things. They can try different things. They can say, hey, we're going to do this here, and you can do what you want over there, which, I think is a lot different than many other nations. Yeah. And I think it kind of works, right? It's like this, it has worked at least for the past couple hundred years. And there are signs that certain things are fraying and breaking and, but through it all, we're still here.
And and they don't have money printers. They are confined to some degree.
Yeah.
And so that's much more interesting to me, how to organize local communities, whether it's counties, perhaps up to the state level. That's going to be very interesting to see how that all pans out. And the states do have a lot of power. Now, there is corruption everywhere.
Of course.
But there's also this wave of hating corruption, which is going on right now. So, and you have to think about these people that are corrupt. They're very weak, right? They're weak people. They won't stand up for what's good.
Mm-hmm.
They will do what's in their own best interest, whether it's money or otherwise. So they're not going to sink with the ship. They're going to flip, right? And then you're going to start seeing all of these people spilling the beans on other people. Everybody's compromised.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're going to start this domino effect of corruption. That's going to enrage the population even further. And then that's the moment to push, right? And that's when you can really take back some territory and say, look, like, no, enough of this.
Yeah.
Florida
is incredibly well run, massive budget surplus, no state income tax. I think it's a great place to do business. I consider myself, I'm happy to be a Floridian, right? Not a Californian or, New York person or whatever. I don't even know what they call themselves. But I am proud to be a Floridian. I think, we have a well-run local county plus state government here where it feels, like if I was just accountable to that government, I would be I'm happy for that, right? It's when the federal government comes in and you're paying for all these wars and, all this crazy stuff that's just, it's absurd. It's insane. Like if they just disappeared tomorrow, I wouldn't notice the difference and I'd be happy just to be a Floridian. That's honestly how I feel, right? We don't need this crazy bureaucracy. It's insane. It's absolutely insane.
It is, and it's become
it's the antithesis of what the founding fathers of our nation wanted. And they said, this is a necessary evil to be constrained. And we want to have this very decentralized, loose, very weak federal government. We don't want this super powerful, overbearing federal government. And I think the founding fathers would see how things have evolved and roll over in their grave with what's happening.
Oh, of course. The whole, it's not even about the United States. The United States is 100% being used as a battery in order to create this new world order, one world government. It's been written about tons. Even in The Creature from Jekyll Island, G. Edward Griffin calls the Federal Reserve the doomsday machine, right? On how, machine. It's in the Communist Manifesto that in order to achieve, your communist utopia, you need to control the creation of credit.
Yeah, you got to be able to more control. It's always more control. We got to have more power to build our utopia.
Yeah, and then you have these people, these people that have lost everything in North Carolina getting $700 while we send billions across the ocean.
That fucking infuriates. That is insane. It's insane.
And this is where people need to be brave and just say, no, I'm not going to comply with anything. I'm not going to comply with traffic tickets or anything. Like, you guys are insane. And it's gotten, it's gotten so in your face, disrespectful, just evil.
Have you read The Sovereign Individual?
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite books of all time.
It's incredible.
It talks about this, through human history of these processes of going from decentralization, hunter-gatherers, to farming, which is more centralized, and you have cities and there's more violence. And then, you've got this decentralization period, and then you've got now the Roman Empire, and then you've got this decentralized period, and now we've got the nation state era. So it just talks about how, through civilization, we've gone through these periods of decentralization, centralization, decentralization, centralization. And right now we're in this period of centralization. It just seems like the next 50 to 100 years is going to be this gradual return to a more decentralized, nomadic / less nation state power, with especially the tools. They predicted, the digital currency like Bitcoin, this decentralized money. They predicted a lot of the things. And it's fascinating when you realize the book was written in the 90s, well before all this stuff happened, the predictions they've made.
Yeah. Even Henry Ford talked about energy money.
Yeah. Energy money. Yeah.
And, I don't think it's going to be too gradual. I think the loss in belief in government institutions at the large level, at least, is.
That's happened massively with COVID, right? Especially COVID and stuff like that.
And all of the
media lying, trusting media down, weaponization of the judicial system. Yeah, there's been a lot of that. So I think, let's see what happens. I believe that, if the pendulum swings back here and we have a Trump presidency, I think that we could see more trust institutions if they run them correctly, right? And then if they abuse them again, you could lose that. But I think over time, people will start to exit the matrix, and I believe it'll be more gradually than suddenly. But let's see.
Yeah, I still don't know. We're already in the debt doom loop, right? So they they will have to print more money at ever quicker rates in order to keep the bubble from collapsing.
I guess the question is, do you believe that Elon and Ron Paul can get us out of that loop? If they, You don't think they can. You think they get in, Trump wins, they get in the office. You don't think that the Department of Government Efficiency, you don't think they're going to be able to take us off that trajectory by reducing the budget, cutting unnecessary departments and expenses? Elon's showing he's capable of that. I mean, he went into Twitter, fired 90% of the staff.
Yeah,
these woke.
But on a company that's a little different. When you have Social Security and Medicare and all these entitlements, which are I don't even know how much, like $1 trillion something or more.
Yeah.
I don't know that they will be able to maintain popularity by doing those things. So they're kind of caught in between a rock and a hard place in that sense. So the question is, what's the motivation for being in power of a system which mathematically will fail, right? Because, mathematically it will fail because the money printers will fail. And the money printers will fail because it's a debt-based monetary system. So if I was starting the dollar and I loaned you $10,000 and I said you have to pay me 5% interest, I'm the central bank, where does the interest come from? Because I just created $10,000. And so you always have this designed to fail mechanism with central banks that the interest sucks the oxygen out of the room. It's like a game of musical chairs where it's the one chair when the music stops, and then it's two chairs when the music stops, and then it's three chairs when the music stops. And so they have to address a transition from printed money and how to get out of that conundrum. But then the system doesn't look the same.
So I've actually been thinking a lot about this. And when I watched that Pomp Howard Lutnick podcast the other day, Howard had some fascinating takes in direct regard to this. He says that right now, I think they were talking about the debt and the spending and all this stuff. And, one of the ways to get yourself out of debt is to grow yourself, have your economy make so much money, be so powerful that you so much technological progress that you just eradicate it by just massive growth, by massive GDP growth, right? But what he said was very interesting. He said the assets of the United States are just insane, right? You've got this, he was talking about this Anwar oil reserve that's in Alaska that supposedly has been blocked from being accessed. And he says there's a safe way to go in there without destroying the environment. You can get so much oil, like second only to Saudi Arabia in the world or something like that. And he was talking about being able to leverage the economic might and the assets of the United States to back some of this stuff, to pay for some of this stuff. And I just thought it was an interesting way to look at it, right? Because we're looking at it right now, it's just math, but hey, what if you change the formula by saying, hey, look what we're going to be able to produce here? And he also talked about the Saudis have a sovereign wealth fund where their government actually they make money, right? So he did the math, and I think it was what if we had this fund that just made 1% a year or something along those lines? That's so much money that it would eradicate the debt. So it was another way to look at it. I thought was interesting, at least to go down that rabbit hole to explore those ideas he had. And I had never heard those ideas from any other political people. And what I found was that if Trump's transition team, if he wins, they are, which I believe he will, and I guess we're going to find out quick because this will be released today, and we'll know probably if they can't stuff the ballot boxes for 3 months after the election again, and these super blue Democratic swing state cities where they have 99% Democratic poll watcher observers and 1% Republican observers, if they can't do that, if they can't get away with that again, I think we have a Trump presidency, and you can call that a conspiracy if you want, but I truly believe that. But and that's what happened in 2020. I firmly believe that. Watching that all play out.
Yes, it was 100%
months after the election, and you've got all this stuff, and just you can't examine any of it. All the judges are you have no standing. We're not going to look at the evidence. Just you don't have standing to even approach any of it. So I think there was massive fraud that occurred, personally. But I think that if we can get this Trump presidency, I think you've got a good chance of seeing a lot of different people with new ideas, and maybe we can win some ground within that framework, right? And Howard Lutnick, as leader of this transition team, what they've done, I think, is brilliant. Is for the first time they're not taking money from the government to fund the transition team. It's all privately done. So basically, the the party in power right now controls the government, and they are in charge of that, department that gives the transition team money to do. So they are in the loop knowing what they're doing. And Trump has purposely realized, hey, we're going to not get any of your money. We don't want you knowing what we're doing. We don't want you to know what we're saying, what our plans are. So
he doesn't trust the institutions either.
He doesn't trust the institutions. You're exactly right. And why would you? I mean, it's smart. You can't trust them. I mean, the corruption is evident, right? And he talks about this a lot. Like when he first got elected, maybe he really wasn't prepared. He was like, I appointed all these people because they were who was recommended to me to appoint. But I think now going in for the second time, I think the game plan is very different. And you learn from that first experience, and now you're much more prepared if you're able to get that power. And I think we're going to see some pretty incredible changes here. And I think it's going to be a good thing. I really do.
I think there is some probability that if he gets in, then you're going to see the financial system collapse.
Really?
Yeah.
Why do you say that?
So you have a situation where if the faction in power now can't win the election by cheating or other means, then you can create as much chaos as you want. There's actually a lot of talk about this, about creating some kind of financial crisis or other crisis in order to defer leaving power through either martial law or other means, right? And so I think we're at the point where it's not going to be a normal transition of power.
I hope you're wrong, man, because I feel like if that happens, there's going to be a civil war. I mean, I know so many people that are ready. Like they're just willing, hey, this is it for me. I know them personally that, I think if we can't keep our, democratically elected system, and there's not transparency there, and we're not able to alleviate that pressure of swinging, from one party to the next, of everybody having a chance kind of, at the podium of power. I think that if that happens, I think there's so much tension in the air right now, so much anxiety, that I think that, there very well may be a civil war if that happens. And it's kind of a crazy thing for me to say, but I kind of feel that way, right? I feel like there's going to be, something crazy that happens.
Well, I think that that's probable. I don't know that we'll get through November without experiencing something like that.
Yeah.
Because, if you look at, say, Martin Armstrong, he's actually in Florida. He comes from a financial look at everything, but he also has some very interesting software called Socrates. And he's predicted a lot of things with wicked accuracy too. He says, which I agree with, that no matter who wins, half the country will not
be happy. Yeah.
Right. Whether that's a civil war or whether that's a breakdown of the federal layer on top of the existing states, we'll see. I don't believe in movies like Civil War. I think that's just pure predictive programming where they want us to hate each other. I believe that people do not need government to be civil. I think they need government to go to war.
Interesting take.
Right? And so if we all are calm and we just realize that, hey, I've got no beef with anybody, and we are not caught off guard when this happens, right? Like if this happens, then I know where I'm going. I've got enough fuel. I don't need to stop. I have food. We'll have all this stuff. Yeah. This is why being self-sovereign, regardless if one believes in a certain political figure or one believes that the system can continue or how it can continue, being self-sovereign and not dependent on the system is just a positive no matter
Absolutely.
what.
No matter where you're at, no matter what your political beliefs are, no matter, you're prepared for anything. I think it's just that insurance policy against, the worst case scenarios, right? So there's no doubt in my mind that that's the smart play to always, try to aim for self-sovereignty and to understand why that's important.
Yeah. Yeah. And, and I try to look at the other side, like what are other people hearing? Like the little box in Twitter that I hear only what I want to hear. What are other people hearing? And, there's real fear getting pumped into people about, Trump is going to, just kill every good person.
I mean, that's
like military.
That's the craziest thing I've ever heard in my life. I mean, the guy was in power for like 4 years already. I mean, like he didn't kill anybody. It was like we had less war, less, it was until COVID. I mean, the economy was the best it's ever been. I mean, and you can argue about COVID all you want, if it was right, if he was wrong, whatever. But like, it was pretty much like a Bill Clinton rerun from the 90s. I mean, like that's really what his presidency was kind of like, good economy, kind of that 1980s Democrat style. I mean, that's what it seemed like to me, at least. I mean, the media hated him and demonized him. And, I think he was, and I will give him this criticism that, like, I think some of it was that he really rubbed their noses in it when he won, because they all said, there's no chance you're going to win. They criticized him. They, hated him. Like during his candidacy, they said, oh, he's not going to win. And they just attacked him. And then what he did was, the second he won, I remember this, like, cause I saw it and I was just like, oh my God, that's crazy. That's like shots fired. Like, was like basically just him coming down the thing to like as the victor. And it was just like a replay of all the pundits in the media just saying, he's never going to win. He's this. Oh, they basically just saying it, laughing about him. And he just kind of like played that clip and put it out there. And it was like, okay, well, guess what? They're not like, instead of just being like, hey, like, we beat all the odds and, your voices have been heard, a more unifying message. It was kind of like, hey, like, it's war. It's like, it's a media war, like.
I don't think he thought he was going to win. And I think the reason why he didn't think he was going to win was because people were not talking about how they felt.
Yeah.
Like people were internally feeling a certain way. Mm-hmm. And that effect is even stronger now. Yeah. Like, I think you're right. And then you have these polls that come out where they're neck and neck.
It's like, get out of here. I mean,
there is zero chance. Martin Armstrong has Harris's approval rating at 7%.
Oh my God.
And the media, probably less than 10 is accurate.
Supposedly the media is 95% unfavorable to Trump and like 75 or 80% favorable to Harris. I mean, like that is if the media was just like neutral, it would be like a 90-10 election probably, which is crazy to me. I mean, like the fact that they even have like power to sway people's opinions after like all the lies, all the bullshit, all the propaganda, they just read off. I mean, they're not journalists. I mean, they just literally read off teleprompter and they're all reading the same thing on every station. It's like, it's crazy to me.
Think about it like this. Would you trust the news on the Truman Show?
I wouldn't trust the news on any. I don't trust the news at all.
No, the movie, The Truman Show, right?
I've never seen that movie.
Never seen it?
No.
Okay, you get it's Hollywood, it's whatever, but Hollywood is owned by people that we'll just say it. They're downstream of central banks, right? Mm-hmm. And so they put these movies together, which are supposed to be fictional, but there's elements of truth, right?
Of course, so yeah.
If the whole thing is there's this dome and this show and it's, Jim Carrey and he doesn't know he's on a show, but the whole world's watching him. So everything is fake, right? And so it's kind of what's going on here, except there's a lot of Trumans and we're all Trumans. And so we're seriously in 5th generation warfare, and people's reality are directly and unequivocally created by the information they receive.
It's so true.
It's around.
So true. It's so true. I mean, you're right. I mean, it's crazy that people, like some of the stuff people believe. I mean, they're literally inside this matrix where they just, the media will just create these hoaxes and lies. I mean, the latest one was this whole Liz Cheney thing. Like, Trump says he wants to kill Liz Cheney. It's like, what did you watch they like doctor the clip and edit it and put it up? It's like, this is such a lack of journalistic integrity. I mean, like, it's like almost, it's verging on libel. I mean, is what it is. I mean, it's crazy, and people just eat it up and believe it. It's insane to me. And this one hoax after the next, one lie after the next. I mean,
and blatant,
just blatant. Like if you do 5 minutes of research and just watch what he said, like the whole clip. I mean, but this is what they do. They doctor. I mean, it's like how they get away with this is insane to me. I mean, like people should be revolting over this. I mean, this is like they have no credibility. I mean, you have no ounce or shred of credibility. And I see something on TV, and like my first inclination is, I think the opposite. Like, oh, if you're telling me X, I believe Y. Like that's kind of where I'm at. Like, so it's gotten to the point where it's like you almost can't trust anything that's said. It's crazy, right? It's like that's why I think X has become so powerful, because people are on there and they just like post what's actually happening, and it's like, hey, I'm recording this live right now. Here's what's actually happening, and the media will come out and say this never happened, but it's like you've got the video right there. Like you can see that this happened. Like it's insane. It's insane. Oh, all right. I have one final question for you, and let's tie this back into this whole idea of digital privacy. If you could recommend one action for listeners to start their journey towards digital freedom, what would it be? And how can they build from that first step to feel truly empowered?
I couldn't really recommend one, so I built one. So,
I love to hear that. I love to hear that.
Come to the website, and very soon I'll launch the actual course, and I'm just going to refine it, And my goal is to where we can get beginners from 0 to 60 on digital privacy, understanding the lay of the land, understanding how to think about digital privacy, understanding that none of these solutions are guaranteed to last over time, and that you always need to stay on your toes, and and just all that stuff. I mean, it's really, the first step is just understanding that we live in a digital jungle and we need to have digital tools to protect ourselves.
Absolutely.
And privacy is unequivocally freedom.
I totally agree with you.
You cannot have freedom in any world without privacy in the physical world or privacy in the digital world.
Privacy is the right to selectively reveal yourself to the world.
Exactly.
It's one of my favorite quotes.
Yeah.
Wow. John, it's been one hell of a conversation. You know, we might not agree on everything. And I think it's so important to put out different ideas, different thought processes, right? Like my thoughts are different than your thoughts. And, you know, it's so important not to have like a ministry of truth that decides what's true and what's not true, right? For every individual, go out and seek, do your own discovery, right? And find out what's true to you, right? Figure out, do your research, come to your conclusion, and, you know, have that based on reason, evidence. And, you know, we don't always have to agree on everything. It's perfectly fine to have a civil discussion, for you to have a different idea, for me to have a different idea. And I think it's so crucial that we continue to have conversations like this. John Burnett, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah. Thank you, sir.